Say my name. I am awake. I am the danger. I am the one who knocks.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the next episode of Breaking into Breaking Bad. This is Clifford and Caleb Humphrey, your hosts, as we dive into the season finale of Season 4, Episode 13, Face Off. Caleb, would you please do for us the honors of giving us a recap of what happens in this very famous episode?
I'd love to, but I think everyone pretty much knows the outcome and what happens in this episode. One of the best finales of a season, I think, we've seen thus far. Basically, the war between Gus and Walt and Jesse comes to an end with Walt finally getting the upper hand and blowing up Gus Fring. We see a lot of movements that Walt uses to get Jesse to get on his side, and them using a familiar face, Hector Salamanca, to be the killing blow, which I thought was pretty fantastic. I don't want to get too much into this because I'm sure we're about to go through it, but this was just a one of my favorite episodes. This is a good one, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Great. So the title, kind of funny. I mean, I'll say on the face of it, the title "Face Off" just means this. It's coming down to the end here. We're gonna have a face off between Walt and Gus, and they're gonna fight it out. But of course, it also has that dark humor meaning to it as well, because at the very end, Gus literally gets his face blown off.
Quite literally. Yep.
Yeah. So a little witty move there, I think, by the producers and the writers, but we appreciate that. Okay, so what happens in the introduction here? We see Walt going over to it picks up right where the last one left off, where he tried to blow him up in his car, and Gus has that weird intuition that something is off, and so he doesn't get in his car, and presumably he gets a taxi or something and gets home another way and just leaves his car there in the hospital. But Walt doesn't know that, and I guess he's afraid of what could happen. So he runs over and takes the bomb off of the car, and it's kind of intense. There's some music going on, and meanwhile, two police agents interrogate Jesse, and he definitely made himself suspicious when he told Andrea that it might have been ricin poisoning that had led to Brock's illness, which I guess is something that most people don't know about unless you're up to nefarious, activities. And so the police wanted to bring Jesse in to question him. And of course, if you're a police officer and you take one look at Jesse's record, you think, oh yeah, this guy's up to no good, and we've got a criminal here. We just need to get him to confess. So they interrogate him pretty hard. And that's kind of how the intro ends. Anything else did I miss anything there?
Yeah, no, that was pretty solid. I thought it was strange that when they were interrogating him, Jesse then says, like, "Am I under arrest?" Like, no, you're not under arrest. We just want to talk to you. And Jesse, he gave the impression that Jesse could have just been like, "All right, well, see you later," but they didn't. They didn't kind of go into that more often. He just kind of stayed there.
Right. I mean, they put him in a little bit of a catch-22 where he doesn't want to look suspicious. And so it's within his rights to say, I'm out of here. I'm going to leave. Just like it's within his rights not to incriminate himself by saying anything. He could have said, I'm going to plead the fifth to every question they asked him, but that's just going to make him look suspicious.
Right.
On the other hand, he's got to be careful about what he says, because they're going to try and trap him and kind of play psychological games with him to try and say something that will incriminate him. So I mean, what he should have done right away was say, I want to speak to my lawyer, and brought Saul in. He kind of delayed a little bit and was lucky he didn't end up saying something, before then. So anyway, Saul eventually does show up, as we see later, and kind of controls the situation, which was good because Jesse's just not one, under pressure like that to always make good decisions. So, and we have this strange situation where Walt it wants to get back to his house to get some cash so that Saul's secretary, so he can bribe Saul's secretary to tell him where Saul is. And so he has to go back to his home, but he's suspicious that Gus is going to have guys watching his home. So he does what we've seen him do. It's funny. I mean, when Walt puts on his lying shtick, like it's the same kind of voice. Like it's his, like, he calls his neighbor and says, we're out on vacation and we think we may have left the burner on. Would you go over and see if we left the burner on? In fact, and I thought about that and I thought, gee whiz, like they could have booby trapped the place. They could have shot first and asked questions later. And if it ends up being Walt's neighbor instead of Walt, like, whoops. The point is, Walt puts his neighbor in considerable danger.
Oh, yeah. He was willing to let Becky just get axed just for him to see what was going on. He knew what he was doing. Becky,
was that her name, Becky? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Like, this sweet old lady that he obviously has some, relationship with as his next door neighbor. But I think that's not a small thing to overlook quickly. Like, it shows how ruthless Heisenberg really is.
Oh, yeah. He's just looking out for him.
He'd probably say, well, no, like I'm going to care for my family before I care for my neighbor. But it's all getting mixed up right now in ways that
you could say that Gus and Gus's men are very careful to not leave behind any kind of loose ends. So maybe if they knew it wasn't him, they wouldn't have done anything.
These are the guys that kill children too. I mean,
right.
But of course, as we know, Walt's not above poisoning children either. So,
oh yeah, there we go.
Anyway, Walt suspects that his house is being watched, and we see that he's right. In fact, smart move on his part. He's being cautious, and it pays off. But when he does go into his house, he finds out there are actually other guys there, and he gets out really by the skin of his teeth, and is able to grab as much cash as he needs, and flees the scene somehow. And so then he's able to find out where Saul is, calls Saul, has Saul go and rescue Jesse from the police agents, and that situation is neutralized.
And it was good because he needed to talk with Jesse to find out like their next move, because he had no idea, and he knew that Jesse had been with Gus during the whole process of them Walt trying to get Jesse back on his side. So he knew it was his only option.
Right. Yeah. And it's there that when Walt is talking with Saul, that he gets the information from Saul, that he got from Jesse about Hector Salamanca. And he's the one who says, and Saul doesn't really know. He's like, all I know is there's this old man, he's in a nursing home, and he's of some importance. And Walt has to kind of put it all together and figure out. He has to put together the old history between Hector and Gus, because I mean, I don't know. I would have assumed if I were Walt, I would have assumed they were on the same team.
Well, he knew that he knew that from what Jesse had told him, that things were coming to ahead with the cartel, and that it was not going to be good, and that like Saul was going to bend the knee per se. And he knew that Hector from, season, I believe 1 or 2, with his own personal run-ins with Hector and Tuco, that they were going to be picked up by Tuco's cousins and to go and work for the cartel. So I think he was able to kind of put 2 and 2 together from that they actually were not friends. And that's what it kind of says. He's like, oh wait, they're enemies. And that's kind of what he went for, especially when Saul says, it's this old guy, has a bell that he brings. And
Cubes, this might be the right time for you to tell the audience about that time that you didn't you win a lot of money once for dressing up Hector Salamanca?
I think we talked about this, but it's a great story. Could say it again. Yeah, no, I for everyone that didn't pick up on that one episode that we recorded, I dressed up as Hector Salamanca and at work for a Halloween costume, and I think I won like $200-$300 or something. It was well worth it. Good memory.
With the bell and everything.
Oh yeah, the whole thing.
Well, so you've seen this show over a dozen times. So
yeah.
Do you think that the writers of the show make it feasible that Walt could have put together that these guys were enemies and that he could use Hector against Gus?
Yes.
Do you think that's plausible? Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Because his own history with Hector, like I said in season 1, then what Jesse had told him about the fighting between Gus's men and the cartel, and he knew that Hector was part of the cartel through his relationship with Tuco. So, yeah, I think one can come to that conclusion.
I guess I would have thought, well, if they're enemies, Gus would have had him killed a long time ago. Except that maybe he understands that that would be a kind of a mercy. Like it's
it's an old guy and they can't speak.
His life is in a really, really poor quality. Every day is a kind of punishment. And if we remember when Gus told him that he killed his last remaining nephew or something like that, was it his son? I can't remember. He glories. Gus gloats in the fact you're going to have to think about this every day, that you have no bloodline left. And Gus takes a real sick pleasure in that. So anyway, however he does it, Walt puts together that these guys are enemies and that he can try to convince Hector to make himself a suicide bomber, as it were, and destroy Gus this way. Because the hardest thing for Walt is to find out where Gus is and create some situation where Walt can pin him down, because Walt only has really his wits, whereas Gus has got force. Gus has got lots of people that work for him that can do hit jobs and whatnot. So the way Walt goes about it, convincing Hector to go to the DEA just to deliver the message, and it's funny that he went to the trouble to get Hank there. He could have just gone to the DEA, and Walt assumes, I guess, that
Gus was watching. He knew that Gus was watching Hank, so he had to make it. He had to get the visual of Hector being in cohorts, or at least it looking like it with Hank. And that's what happens. But I love when Hector agrees to it, and the nurse comes in, and he's just sitting there ringing the bell, and the nurse just says, "What is it, Mr. Salamanca? Do you have a poopy?" His face is just like, I don't know what Dia is.
Yeah, Dia. That was good. DEA, Dia. Yeah. So Hector goes down to the office and delivers the message of just like F you, I think, to the whole DEA.
Because he's old school. No matter what, he was not a snitch. No matter how much he hated Gus, and he knew he could have gotten the DEA to get Gus, he was not going to snitch.
Yeah, and if we just pause on that for a second, it shows that Hector has this nobility, this noble vision, of what he ought to look like, this sense of virtue, the virtue of a drug dealer, is that you never at any point, are going to be a snitch and work with the DEA. And that was probably part of the arrangement, is that Walt worked out with them. You don't actually have to you don't have to give them any information. You just have to go there.
Look like you did.
And make it look like you did, so that we can lure Gus in, which is of course what happens. Now, poor Hank is hoping that he's going to get some good break here, and nothing I think Comes would accept some pretty dramatic disappointment, but
Yeah, what does he say? He's like, well, at least this time he didn't shit himself, so there's progress.
that's right. That's right. So it's also in this episode that we learned that Brock was not poisoned, right?
Right, with the ricin.
Okay, so critically also, this is where in this episode we learned that Brock was not poisoned by ricin, turns out.
Correct.
Which I always thought was kind of far-fetched. I still don't know what happened to that cigarette, though.
You don't?
Well,
Did you not watch the episode?
I did, but are we to assume that Walt somehow took it out to lead Jesse to think that it was the ricin? Because if let's just go ahead and fast forward to the end in case we learn that he was poisoned by a plant, which is kind of rare, but it's found outside, and it can make kids really sick. I guess it can kill them. And Jesse finds out, and he tells Walt at the very end, and it plays into the whole situation with Gus, because for Jesse, he's thinking, I have to partner with Walt to kill Gus, because Gus, dang it, he tried to kill Brock, and he's going to kill us too. And so what Jesse finds out is that actually Brock wasn't poisoned by ricin, and therefore it wasn't Gus. And now, oddly enough, Jesse feels like a kind of guilt for participating in the killing of Gus, knowing that he didn't actually deserve it for the reason, at least, that Jesse thought. And then we learn at the very end that, in fact, it was Walt who poisoned Brock.
Right.
But I still don't understand how he got the cigarette.
So let's back up to the whole idea of the last episode. And I didn't bring this up because I didn't want to, jump into this. But do you remember when Walt told Skylar, like, hey, I need to not go with you. You go with Hank, and I'm going to separate. And he's sitting by the pool, and he's twirling his gun. Do you remember that part?
Yeah. And he's twirling the gun towards him. And it points toward him twice. Yep.
The first two times it lands on him, and this third time it lands somewhere else. And he looks back, and it shows the lily of the valley plant in the background, not zoomed in or highlighted or anything, but just for a brief second. And it shows Walt looking that way, and then it cuts away. That's it. But it goes on to play that's
so
where
he had that plant already. He didn't go and
had the idea. He
just has this poisonous plant in his yard. And
right. Now, the one thing that it doesn't show is how did he get the lily of the valley to Brock for him to get sick from it?
Yeah,
we don't know.
We
don't know the exact. We don't know the exact what method he did, but we know that he thought all this through. He got Saul and he got Huel to pat him down to take the ricin out of Jesse's cigarettes. And
you really think that Huel was able, in patting him down, a kind of expert robbery fashion, to slip it right out of his.
Remember this question later on in the next season, and I'll be able to pinpoint to a specific point. But yeah, so Huel took the ricin out, and then
he took the whole pack of cigarettes, right?
Well, he took the ricin cigarette out of the pack. And
but you can only do that by first taking the whole pack from Jesse's wallet, or pocket rather, pulling the one cigarette out that Huel, I guess, figures out which one it is, and then he puts the cigarettes back in Jesse's pocket.
So, however it's done, it was done, and the plan was to blame it on the ricin and then blame it on Gus. And at the very end, what you just mentioned, Jesse says, well, he had to go, right? And then, Walt's like, yes, he did had to go.
Oh, yeah, he definitely had to go.
But this was Walt's last play. He had run out of options on how to get Jesse back on his side. Right. And he couldn't think of anything else. And the fact that he was willing to get Brock sick, I don't know if Lily of the Valley would have only made him sick and he knew that, or it was a price he had to pay or anything like that.
He was willing, but he was willing to take the risk that he might die.
Right. But
That's the other option.
Yeah, it was. Oh man, it was a brilliant. I just love this episode. It was played out brilliant. And how at the very end it zoomed in on the lily of the valley, and then you find out, wait a second, oh my gosh, it was Walt this whole time,
Yeah.
and it was just brilliant.
Yeah. Well, it definitely makes us realize that Walt is capable of greater evil than we formerly thought, or I guess Heisenberg, if we want to say that. But
Yeah.
anyway, well, there's still some unanswered questions there. Again, I don't know how they would have gotten Brock away from his mother and given him the poison, but whoever did it,
Right.
But I'm willing to allow some liberties here for the sake of the really good story.
There's some people that said, oh, he slipped it into his cereal or his juice box or something, but I unless there's something that I have not picked up on, I don't think we know the exact method on how he got it to Brock. But nonetheless, that's what it was assumed happened.
Yeah. Well, when Saul finally gets the police to release Jesse and he's walking back, he gets picked up right away by Gus's guys. They tase him, they forcibly put him in the lab, and they make him continue to cook. And that we don't know what would have happened to Jesse had Walt not been successful. But
right.
At this point, Jesse's kind of a slave in the lab, just working to create more cooks. And meanwhile, Gus, who operates within the same virtue ethic, I guess, of the drug lord that Hector does, knows that you can't let a snitch, you can't just let it go.
Right.
He has to die now. And so, and it's like he doesn't have a choice. Like Gus is like, I have to do this, Hector. You know that. Like this is the law of the jungle, as it were. So he shows up to Hector's place just as Walt had expected. And the way they set it up was brilliant. If you just like looking at the facial expressions, which is really all that Hector has, facial expressions. But there's a lot that he's able to portray in his face. Just the anger,
yes.
Just the fact that he knows he's about to die, but he's willing to do it anyway. And his resolve is just evident. And then likewise, this sort of smug confidence that Gus has that he's going to now put an end to his rival here in a way that's kind of pathetic because Hector just can't fight back. He doesn't think he can, at least.
Well, this was the first time that you see Hector finally look at Gus. Every single time Gus has come to see Hector.
Yeah, right. He's looks
always
aside.
like, look at me. Are you going to look at me? And he always is looking away and he will never look in my eye. And so when he finally looked him in the eye, Gus knew something was wrong.
Right. He starts thinking, and the transformation in Gus's face as he's putting it together, what's about to happen is amazing. Of course. And then the way they do the whole thing where he walks out and you only see half of him and it looks like he's fine. And then you get to see the whole face and half of it's gone.
And that explosion looks so real. Like the way that door just popped off, it looked really intense. Now, obviously the half of the face was a lot of CGI, but it was brilliant. And I'm assuming Tyrus didn't have at least half a face.
Yeah. I don't think he was as lucky. Yeah. So we know that colors mean different things, at least they seem to be significant in this show. And Gus is wearing a very strange purple jacket when he walks in to do this. I found that to be a little odd. Does that strike you at all as kind of weird? Or
the color purple or the suit he was wearing? The
fact that he's wearing a purple jacket. I have this feeling that like if we were to figure out exactly what the color purple stands for, it'll unlock all these mysteries that we didn't even know were there.
Well, we know he likes wearing the yellow button down.
Mustard.
Mustard.
Dwight Schrute mustard.
Absolutely.
Yellow. Yeah. And
so he is very color coordinated when it comes to certain things. Yeah, I'll have to look into that purple if there was any significance.
Yeah, I just thought it was odd, but okay, well, maybe somebody else will figure this out and they'll be able to ring us up on Twitter or something and tell us. But okay, what happens next? So Walt now that he's killed Gus, he's got to go and save Jesse before those guys find out that Gus has been killed, because they're probably just going to shoot Jesse. And there's some moments when Walt has to do really difficult, scary things, like confront other people with guns and kill them. And he does it without flinching. So somehow we don't get to see how he overpowers a guy who was at the top of the lab. And I guess Walt gets
not necessarily overpowers him, but he has a gun on him, and he probably knew where he was stationed because.
Well, right, but I mean, by that I mean he had to get him to turn his gun over, and then he had to say, "Okay, I want you. We're going to go down into the lab, and I'm going to stand behind you, so that when your partner buzzes, or when we buzz, and the partner looks and sees you, he's going to. The guy has to play along that whole time, which means
I don't think
Walt
he walked through. This is exactly what's going to happen. You open the door. I'm going to shoot you.
Right. No. Right. But my point is, he had to comply with a lot of different things.
Right.
And Walt had to have sufficient psychological force to get him to be pliant, submissive, to do what I say without questioning, without thinking through what might this lead to.
You're talking about a seasoned Heisenberg at this point, which his main thing is psychological warfare.
Yeah,
this guy is no season 1 Heisenberg anymore. He probably
right. He's a season 4 Heisenberg at this point. But I mean, but the guy that he has to overpower is probably not a season 1 drug lord gangster type guy either. I'm just saying it's kind of impressive. And Walt shoots and executes the whole thing in such a way he doesn't end up shooting Jesse, which could have happened. And shoots the other guy really quickly, and so just cleans up, and then he knows exactly what to do with the lab, namely burn it down, which again, I mean, I got some questions, like, okay, there's a lot of metal in that lab and it's underground, so I don't know how much too. A lot of chemicals. That's true. And Walt's going to know kind of what's flammable. And
remember, he was able to make a little bomb out of to blow up the windows, but not blow up himself in Tuco's thing. He was able to create mustard gas. True. Like, if anyone's going to make a fire hot enough to burn down an underground lab, I'm
just saying, it's going to have access to the oxygen. It's going to have to burn hot enough to melt all the metal down to be something like unrecognizable as a meth lab, I guess.
Right. But he wanted
we don't have to.
Up. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm thinking a good forensics, fireman is going to figure out, oh, this was a chemical fire. Oh, this is like, why would there be these chemicals at this, dry cleaner? I don't know. But anyway, it happens. And Walt is victorious. Let's just give him his victory.
Yep.
And then, just where Jesse tells him, like, hey, it turns out Brock was poisoned by this Lily of the Valley thing. And it really came across to me, at least, that Jesse felt guilty for killing Gus. It's like he really deserved it, right? Like, he's begging Walt to tell him, like, ease your conscience. We did the right thing. And and here again, like, we see over and over again that Jesse is the moral compass of this show. And I have a friend who hates this show. He doesn't like it at all. And it's because he says,
do we throw his name out here?
No, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't do that. But he says the moral compass of the show is a very corrupt human being, is a pathetic human being. Jesse, he's kind of the hero in a way, because he's the one who, even in these moments, like, questions the killing of Gus, because it's still a kind of murder, even though Gus has murdered all kinds of people and would likely murder them given the chance. And at that very moment had Jesse in servitude, in slavery, basically. On one hand, you've got Walt, who doesn't think, doesn't question, he doesn't hesitate. He just executes and does the thing that needs to be done. Jesse is hesitating all the time. He's, even in this moment, is questioning what they did. And it's just it's just telling, and again, for some people like my friend, it makes the show kind of twisted in a way, where I guess he would prefer that the moral compass, the character who has the moral compass, has a kind of a greater nobility than Jesse seems to have here. But I'll just tie this back in with another Shakespeare play in a way. Hamlet. Hamlet is the story, of this prince whose father is murdered, by his uncle. It's the Lion King story, basically. And Hamlet is a kind of pathetic figure too, in that he's questioning all the time. He's not really sure if what he's doing is right, because he has to do some pretty gruesome, daring things. And at the famous speech, to be or not to be, is it really worth, is life worth it? All these, in the midst of all the trials that life has, and he's this guy who, like Jesse, is kind of waffling back and forth all the time. And so I just say that, maybe bring it up as an example of, it's not the case that, we don't have examples, even in great literature, of characters who are like Jesse, who are capable of great noble things, and having, even while they're corrupt in some ways themselves, they still have a lock on something that's good and right and true. And that leads them to question when they have to do really difficult, potentially evil, from a certain perspective kind of things. So anyway, just throwing that out there as it's a comment to end season 4 on. So we get the famous line when Skylar calls Walt, or Walt calls Skylar, and she says, did you see this bombing? Like, I can't believe it. What's going on? And she puts it together that Walt knows all about it and in fact orchestrated it. And then he just says, I won.
It was perfect, because we've only seen a couple times, very, very few times, where Walt has really got to brag on his accomplishments. That's right. And he got to do it right there. He was very, he didn't say, oh yes, it was me. I did this. It's just like, was this you? Like, what, like, did you know about this? And he just, I won, just very, yeah, I know about it.
Right.
I won.
Right. Yeah. And then the next scene, the credits start to roll or whatever, the music starts to run. And then it switches over to Walt's house. And there we see the Lily of the Valley plant. And we know brilliant. Walt won, yes. But what kind of a character, what kind of a person is this guy who won? Who, on one hand, we want to say, yeah, he's the hero. He did it. On the other hand, he's the guy who poisoned this little kid. And it's a very dark, troubling note to end on.
I know it's setting up the last season 5, with a lot to go on, and it's oh man.
Yeah. Well, let me say my thought on that was, you almost think like, okay, this should be the end of the show. The show should end here with him saying, I won. That's it. And now Walt has this victory to kind of like rely on the rest of, through all his midlife crisis, whatever else he has to do. And he's going to get back to life as normal. He doesn't have any enemies, and that can be it. But when it ends, not on that note, but on the Lily of the Valley note, it tells us actually the character that we want to hold up and say, this is the good guy won in the end. Now we're left thinking, oh wait, it kind of ends on like a minor note, a natural key, a minor key or a natural note that is kind of discordant in a way. It says, wait a minute, something's off here. Something still isn't resolved. And we know, oh, there's a final movement still. There's a 5th season. And so I guess that's where we have to go.
Yeah. No, it's crazy that we're already on the last season. It's just been just barely over a year since we started this, right?
Yeah. Lots happened. We've grown a lot. We've seen a lot.
Yeah. Talked a lot.
We talked a lot. Yeah. I like to think that the world's different now that we've done this podcast, slightly, at least a little bit. Thanks to our listeners who've been with us this whole time. And I know you've probably been binge watching, binge listening. And I know you're excited with us to march into season 5. So if you have not yet, for some very strange reason, subscribed to our show yet, we ask that you go ahead and do that you encourage your friends and relations to do the same. Like this episode, if you haven't done it yet and you've been saying, I'm going to do it, I'm going to leave a review, go ahead and leave a review, give us those 5 stars. That way more people can see this show and really be encouraged and have their own lives changed like yours has. So anyway, thanks for being a part of this journey, and we will see y'all in season 5 when we break into yet another episode of Breaking Bad.